Cloak and Dagger are often referred to as one of the easy support characters, and even though they might be simple to pick up and play, the difference between a person filling C&D and someone that is an enthusiast is incredibly noticeable. My name is Paz, an Eternity support player on the competitive ladder, and I'm going to tell you all of the things you actually need to know in order to pop off and carry on Cloak and Dagger. Before we get started with their abilities, understand that the way you can carry on Cloak and Dagger is by charging your ultimate as fast as possible. If you are consistently out farming the enemy supports, you are doing so much more for your team, especially the higher you go in rank. The way that you are going to outfarm the enemy isn't by just healing, but rather by weaving impactful damage and being as efficient as possible with all of your cooldowns on the character to maximize your output in neutral fights. With this in mind, let's get started with Cloak and Dagger's kit. Starting off with Dagger's primary fire, she shoots out a homing projectile, healing friendlies for 16 points of health per hit, plus the seasonal bonus she usually gets. She can throw out 12 of these healing projectiles before she has to reload, which is always faster if she just switches between forms, if you didn't know. The projectile also deals 18 damage per round, which is pretty poor and should only be used in very niche situations. Since the darts are homing, it is pretty important to understand how the homing works. Typically, the projectiles will pull into the closest target to your crosshair. This is shown by either the white or red tooltip that shows up whenever you are close to a target. For friendly targets to be homed on, they have to have health that is missing that you can actually heal. If they are full health, they will not be targeted when they go in. The range is not infinite though on this targeting effect, and if you miss so hard that the homing doesn't start, the projectile will just bounce off of a wall and lose its homing effect. Targets can also block your dart if they get in the way of its path, which doesn't come up often, but it's nice to know so you can avoid it anyway. One property about the heal that many people don't actually know is that there are actually two instances of healing that occur when a target is hit. The first heal is the direct heal when targeted, but the second instance is when it does come in contact with either a friendly or an enemy target. When this happens, it makes a light explosion that heals everyone in an 8-meter radius for another 16 points of healing. It's really difficult to see, but if you look closely, you'll see it. The range is super generous, and knowing this will actually help you be more consistent with your healing and reduce the need to use other healing cooldowns for suboptimal situations. Since the healing is a projectile and does not hit targets instantly, times you'll want to use the healing are when your duelists are about to go in for a 1v1 if possible. This will happen a lot right now in Season 2 since dive is so prevalent in the meta the higher you go. What you can do is wait for your Spider-Man or Iron Fist to go in, and right as they are about to start fighting, send them a couple of heals that will keep them sustained as they fight instead of reacting to a lot of their damage after they have taken it. The projectile moves slowly enough for this to be helpful. Since the projectile burst heals after it hits a target, you can also just opt to hit the enemy your friendly diver is targeting to damage and heal at the same time. But understand that this comes at a cost. Yes, you are doing damage, but realize that you are doing 50% less healing because you are using the impact for damage instead of healing. Outside of dive, you'll really want to focus on trying to maintain as many players in your healing as possible. Try to be cognizant of the fact that your healing also has an AoE burst component and hit as many of your teammates as possible when they are stacking so that everyone can live. If you really want to min-max your ultimate charge potential, this is where you're going to be taking it to the next level. Switching forms over to Cloak, we have his primary fire, the Darkforce Cloak, that shoots a beam of darkness energy, dealing 80 damage per second after the most recent update. This takes his time to kill squishies and shortens it to a bit more than 3 seconds for most, without taking into account his damage boost with the Terror Cape. The range for this damage beam stops locking onto targets after 20 meters, which is still pretty good range all things considered, but usually not enough to contest flying characters consistently, but still enough to outrange an Emma Frost. The tracking works very similarly to the healing, although you don't get an actual prompt when the beam is ready to track to someone. For this ability, you just have to know, although it is pretty consistent. In terms of how you want to use this ability, you should always be looking to weave in damage when you can. This could look like when there is a weak target trying to get away, or when your team is all healed up and there is nothing you have to save them from, or to do what everyone should be doing building ultimate charge. Eliminating a 250 HP target from 100 to 0 gives you about 8% to your ultimate, which might not sound like a lot, but when you add all of this up with the countless other things that we're going to talk about in this video into your gameplay, you are going to be gapping the Cloak and Daggers on the enemy team by at least 2 to 3 ultimates per game, I promise you. On top of this, if you can manage to eliminate a target early enough in the fight, you will effectively heal the damage your team would have taken had that target still been in the fight and not been taken out. What is the enemy Hela going to do to your team if she's eliminated 3 seconds into the fight? Absolutely nothing. So don't get carried away and only do damage, but seriously try to find ways to weave in more of that damage into your gameplay so that you're going to feel the difference in both ult charge, how easy it is to heal. It'll feel a lot better. Before we move on to the rest of both Cloak and Dagger's kits, it's important to understand how this mechanic works to actually switch between them. Upon pressing the cooldown, you'll conduct a very brief animation and then be able to use all of your abilities on the next form right away. The only reason I make the distinction is because usually you'll want to shift over to Cloak from Dagger to keep your team alive from certain ults with your fading ability. And in those situations, you'll want to actually anticipate them coming so that you don't get caught in that very short animation. It doesn't hurt you a lot, but sometimes it does come in handy to just be a little bit faster. Outside of that, just to review, you should always be using this double shift as a way to reload your projectiles on Dagger. It is faster and gives you more opportunities to use your entire kit. This will give you more ult charge as a result too, since Cloak usually goes underutilized for most players. Shifting our focus back to Dagger though, let's discuss her Veil of Lightforce that, upon casting, sends out a healing wall that replenishes 45 points of health on impact and then provides a 15% healing boost to all incoming healing for teammates it touches over a 4-second period. You'll know if you hit a target because if you did, they'll have this little green highlight around their health bar. The wall moves pretty slow until it reaches its max range of 25 meters, where it will then disappear from the air. The veil also will disappear if its center comes in contact with a wall or an enemy shield, which you will have to be very careful about. You can also go around some corners, but you definitely want to avoid it if possible because sometimes it's inconsistent. When should you really use this ability though? First, if you're running a composition where a lot of your team is stacked together, you will definitely want to use the veil on your team when they look to push into the enemy, since that is when they are likely to take the bulk of their damage, or you will actually need to pump out a fair amount of healing. Another moment could be in the opposite situation where you need to get out and the enemies are trying to push with some of their ultimates. If you anticipate a lot of damage, using this proactively could possibly give you just enough time to save your teammates and keep them alive. Times that you'll want to avoid using this ability is if you are trying to save a single teammate that is out of position, since you won't generate as much ult charge from healing a whole group with this as compared to just that solo, since it's only going to heal for like 45 points anyway. The real healing comes afterwards with your primary heal option. The only exception to this rule is if that target that's out of position or is even in a good position has a fight winning ult and is about to get dove and die if you don't keep them alive with this wall. Like a friendly Luna Snow, for example, that is like 95% to her ultimate. In this situation, it is okay to use your healing veil because if she dies, you're just gonna lose the fight anyways. What this ability comes down to is positioning yourself in a place where you can hit as many friendly targets as possible so that you can utilize the heal boost to get your ultimate exponentially faster and keep them alive through damage you otherwise wouldn't be able to. This will then, in return, enable your team to get aggressive and eliminate the whole enemy team with ease. Now, Cloak also has his own version of this ability, the Terror Cape, that, well, hold on a minute. Have we as a community figured out what we're calling these abilities yet? Are they both just walls, they're normal abilities, flashbangs, heal boosts? Let me know what you all call them, because I swear I have heard every name under the sun and I'm actually not sure what I'm supposed to be calling them. But anyway, Cloak throws out his Terror Cape that, when made contact with an enemy, damages them for 55 points, blinds them for a second and a half, and then makes them take 28% more damage for 3 seconds. To put this into context, this damage boost is actually stronger than Rocket's current ultimate for 3 seconds, taking Cloak's primary fire damage from 80 per second to 102 per second, eliminating squishies in just 2.5 seconds. That is incredibly strong. Just like Dagger's healing version of this, you'll want to be using this to hit as many targets as possible generally, but if there is a key target with an ultimate that you need to take out of the fight, targeting just them is fine too. However, because this ability blinds enemies, there are some important interactions you'll want to think about. For example, when Star-Lord uses his ultimate, if he gets blinded, it just straight up doesn't work. Even if someone is close enough to him while he is blinded, the ultimate will not auto-lock onto targets. This could give you and your team just enough time to finish him off before you need to waste a Cloak and Dagger ultimate. This same rule applies to a bunch of other auto-locking characters like Scarlet Witch 2, for example. The problem a lot of Cloak and Dagger players have with this ability is that they just forget to use it to begin with and miss out on a ton of value. I would argue that this is one of the most impactful abilities in your entire kit. Whenever you need to reload your healing, you are swapping to Cloak anyways, so just throw it a wall before switching out, wait 12 seconds, and then do it again. Moving on to the last of Dagger's normal abilities, we have her globe, the Dagger Storm. Upon pressing the cooldown, Dagger launches out a volley of projectile daggers that create a healing over time globe dome on the impact area, whether it be on the wall or on the ground. It will proc on enemy shields too, like Doctor Strange. Mag's shield will just eat it straight up, and then Cap's shield will deflect it. If you want to be consistent with this ability though, just make sure you're aiming at your team's feet since their bodies do not block this cooldown for you. When standing in the 5-meter radius, friendlies enjoy 55 healing per second over 6 seconds, healing for a total of 330 HP in full. Adding in the seasonal bonus and possible bonus that you're hitting from the wall, you are now at 429 healing in full, which is quite the big upgrade. Dagger can use this ability every 12 seconds. Just like every other ability in Dagger's kit, the Dagger Storm has many different uses depending on what you are up against. First, the field can be used if your team is stacked together and taking a fight to boost the amount of ultimate charge you can generate on top of just insane healing output in general, if that is what is required for this specific situation. If healing output is not a concern, you can also use this globe ability to heal your team while you shift over to Cloak and focus on dealing some damage to possibly find a pick, or at the very least, farm some ultimate charge like we've been talking about all day. The last way to think about this bubble is to use it as a tool to keep yourself alive against dive. Outside of the splash that you get from hitting your primary healing, Cloak and Dagger have no way to self-heal, which is problematic. If you are playing against a team with Iron Fist or Black Panther, your tanks aren't really going to need all that much healing anyways, so anticipating when the enemy will dive you and using your globe accordingly will be crucial to your success on the character. Always try and give your friendly support the benefit of the doubt outside of these aggressive scenarios though, because sometimes you don't need to waste the cooldown on yourself and can just use it to get more ult charge elsewhere in the fight, which will allow you to carry even more. As for Cloak's final normal ability, we have his Fade or his Dark Teleportation. In a 10-meter spherical radius around him, all allies within the area will become invincible and will receive a movement speed boost for 2 seconds or until they take an action such as shooting or utilizing an ability. Because of this, if I am playing with teammates that are listening to comms, I will occasionally count down when I'm going to use that Fade so that they don't accidentally immediately leave my Cloak form, but most of the time you just have to time it right and pray that they don't mess it up. Since the ability is on a 12-second cooldown, you have to be careful not to overuse this ability since smart enemies will try to force it out before looking to use their ultimate. Take targets like Psylocke and Magneto for example, or even Jeff the Shark that get their ults significantly countered by your ability by just pressing right click. If you play around them trying to force you out, you'll always have your Fade for when you really need it to use against their ultimate. Outside of using the cooldown for specific key cooldowns, it can also just be used to reposition after the fact as well, since Cloak and Dagger fly for 2 seconds when they are in the ability. So if you are going to use it to escape from a Spider-Man Venom dive, you can then position yourself back on a high ground out of their immediate reach, making it much harder for them to push you immediately after. Most of the time though, the way you are going to get better at using this ability is by positioning yourself in safe places where you can get help from your team quickly depending on what the enemy team is running. It's not a matter of clicking the button that is hard, and rather making sure you have the ability for when you really need it that is difficult to grasp. Now that we have finished talking about all of the other abilities, let's close out by talking about Cloak and Dagger's ultimate, Eternal Bond. No matter what form you are then Cloak and Dagger will perform 4 rapid dashes, healing allies for 250 per second and damaging enemies in the field for 30 per second. Each dash lasts for 8 seconds after it is placed, making the ultimate stick around for a pretty long time if placed optimally. Each dash also spans a length of 15 meters too, making the total distance a staggering 60 meters. The first tip I have for the ultimate is to make sure that after you place the ultimate that you do not worry about healing at all. Your team does not need healing. What they need is for the fight to be done or for a significant advantage to be created before it goes down. This is much easier if you let the ult heal and focus on meaningful damage. The same is true when any other support ults. Because of this, it is always smart to swap to Cloak before ulting so that you can maximize the damage you do fresh out of the ultimate if possible. The second question I get a lot is when should you use your ultimate on Cloak and Dagger? If the enemies only have one ultimate that needs to specifically get countered and your other support can cover it, your ultimate can be used in a slightly more aggressive manner. Usually this can occur when your tank in the front line gets critical. In this situation, you can extend their push by ulting forward on the objective to take a fight that likely starts with a pick on the enemy team. You do have to be careful though. Cloak and Dagger's ultimate is pretty easy to counter since you do stand still for a brief period after each dash. If the enemy has a Hawkeye, he can just one-shot you in the dome, forcing your ult to disappear immediately after you die if you were not careful. The same interaction is true for a Punisher ult or perhaps the most common, a Magneto or Iron Man's ultimate. Which target they have to shoot depends on the form you started the ultimate with though. The enemies will know based on which of their voices is louder in the ultimate, either Cloak or Dagger's. This is a super small detail, but it is nice to know so you shoot the right target to counter them if you're playing a Hawkeye. Sorry Cloak mains, I gotta make this at least a little useful for everyone. Because of these situations, it is important you locate how your enemies will respond to your ultimate before you pull the trigger by looking at the stats screen. If they have something that will specifically counter you in your ultimate, make sure to path in the ultimate in a way that will either give you natural cover or will allow your friendly tanks the opportunity to shield you or dish you a Magneto bubble to stay alive. Other than that, the main idea is that you want to make sure that your team can live where they actually want to fight. When you can, try to have the ultimate around point so that your team doesn't have to die to fight anything that's on the objective, because at the end of the day, you're playing a hero shooter, you win if you capture the point. There's one map where this doesn't work out well for you though, and it's on the Hydra domination maps. It's really annoying, but sometimes if you ult and then the map goes down, it'll just stay up in the sky and no one will get healed. The last point of advice is to just be aware that you can't actually fly upwards in your ultimate and gravity still applies. You can fall down to low ground or off of the map, making your ultimate useless because you pretty much just die or place it in a horrible spot right after. Honestly, after a couple of hours, you should have that movement down, so it's really not that big of a deal. Now that we understand Cloak and Dagger's kit, let's start talking about what counters them. While it is not a direct counter per se, the main problem I see with Cloak and Dagger is that because they are not as aggressive from range as other supports like Luna Snow, for example, while also having a worse ultimate, they kind of just pale in comparison and are not as good. This doesn't mean that you can't run Cloak and Dagger and win, they just aren't as strong at the time of making this video. The main counters are the ones that can kill you in your ultimate, like Magneto and Hawkeye, since those are the characters that you'll want to be aware of when you go for your plays. The same could be said about Iron Man, but he isn't as common right now, so I don't really worry too much about them. Dive heroes like Black Panther and Spider-Man, while a lot of people somehow think that they counter you, they really don't, because you have so much utility to get away from them and live in the backline, more so than on other supports. If you are dying to dive, there's almost always something that you could have done better, whether that be hitting your cooldowns more efficiently or doing a better job of tracking them throughout the fight so you could position better. Cloak and Dagger make up a character that is hard to eliminate but struggles to put out value to the same degree that Loki and Luna are capable of currently, so they aren't as hard meta as a result. As far as synergies go, Moon Knight does share a team up with Cloak and Dagger that allows him to place down a dome that makes him invisible from the enemies. I'm gonna be straight up honest with you guys though, this team up is pretty bad in my opinion. I swear I actually see where the Moon Knight is easier this way than if he just didn't put down the globe at all to begin with. Outside of that, Cloak does an exceptional job at being an easier support that you can slot into most compositions. In brawlier compositions with a thing or Emma, for example, the team can benefit from her healing splashing to nearby targets, as well as both the globe and veil abilities. In dive compositions, she has an easy time consistently healing faster characters due to the auto-aiming projectiles that can heal throughout duels, while also having many different ways of self-sustaining herself to stay alive for longer. She will struggle playing in compositions that require a bit more damage, like poke compositions, due to her lack of prolonged range and damage, but nonetheless, she can still be slotted with spammier flyers and snipers since she has such an easy time healing them regardless. Now that we know how Cloak and Dagger's kit works and the characters they like and do not like to play against, let's review what we've learned today through spectating some high-level VODs. So for today, all 3 VODs, we are going to be looking at a pro player that currently plays for Shikigami, Dinks, who is actually on the Yoki top 10 aura bands of all time for professional rivals for their Cloak and Dagger. So I figured, I mean, if this guy's getting aura banned, we gotta see what's up with that, right? So we're gonna be focusing a lot on the ultimate economy with supports with at least 2 of these VODs. The first one, I wanna show you guys exactly what Dinks is going to do the moment that Ricky puts down his ultimate. I think it's something a lot of people need to do. The moment that this invis goes down, he immediately switches over to his damage form and is just gonna start pressuring all of the things that are very important to kill. He tries to get Orbit out of the sky, considering that Orbit is currently ulting, but all of that damage is gonna force out the enemy team, which lets it so that the rest of Shikigami can get 2 picks immediately after that ult goes down and just pretty much just closes out the fight right here and right now. So you don't have to just do damage after you put down your own ultimate, but it also applies when your friendly support does. Once that ult goes down, you need to finish out that fight as soon as possible so that you can avoid having to use your own Cloak and Dagger ult that Dinks now has for later in the series. So for this next VOD, I actually wanted to look over a specific ultimate that Dinks used to actually push the team forward and be aggressive. It's something that, you know, it kind of went against everything I said against the guide, but in this specific situation, it was actually really good. As you can see right now, no one is really all that low, and there's no need to really push because the cart is so far back. But what you don't realize is that both Dinks and Ricky have their ultimates right now. So what's going to happen is Dinks is actually going to start this fight that is notoriously really hard to win, considering defensive spawn is right where Dinks is at right now, to be aggressive and get just in that backline as fast as possible. What this is going to do is going to allow Shikigami to push forward, get a lot of space, and then Meliphobia gets 2 kills with their Wolverine ultimate. So now what gets to happen is all of Shikigami effectively gets to spawn camp LG as they're trying to walk out of spawn, so that they're pretty much playing defense instead of having to play offense on this horrible place to attack, by the way. It's incredibly difficult. And just look how much easier it is for them to react to ultimates that are going to be coming out from LG onto them at Shikigami. And now they get this for pretty much for free. I mean, Orbit's going to have to dive the point, and now they're just going to have to throw themselves at Meliphobia on the Wolverine. There's no counterplay for them, and it's just the easiest fight ever. So if you can be aggressive with your other support and force an ending round fight, then it's actually okay that you don't hold on to your support ultimates, because then you're creating a situation that's just so easy to win that if you manage to lose in this situation, or if someone manages to die, it's all their fault, and it's really nothing to do with your support ult. So if you can be aggressive, go for it. And for the last VOD that we're going to be watching today with Dinks, I want to really highlight exactly what this situation is and how Dinks plays it, and I think a lot more people should play. So first off, LG Paradox gets the pick onto Ricky here, but realize that while effectively Dinks is the only support, they never actually put themselves in a spot that's easy for them to get caught out. And then all of this time, they're just going to play very safe. They're not going to die for bad positioning. If their teammates die, it's them for bad positioning, but always playing around health packs, playing around cover, playing around the cooldowns that they have, so that they can farm ult. They started at like 60% when Ricky died, and now look how the behavior switches up. Now that we have the ultimate, we have that get out of jail free card, it allows Dinks to be a lot more aggressive on the Cloak and Dagger, find a lot more discords or flashbangs with the walls, and just keep the team alive in a way that they weren't able to before. Now, they're not going to win this fight right here and right now, but I really wanted to highlight how you don't have to do too much on Cloak and Dagger. You can only heal so much, you can only deal so much damage. And what the best thing that you can do on Cloak and Dagger is to not die while also being in a position that you're going to be able to charge that ultimate very fast, so that you have it for later for when your team really needs it. Now, Shikigami is going into this next fight with 5 ultimates, almost 6 with Crazy Mang, and for the rest of this map, they're just going to completely wipe because of stuff like this. And that closes out today's guide for Cloak and Dagger in Marvel Rivals. If you have any questions, make sure to send them in the comments down below, as well as asking me live right now here on YouTube or on Twitch at twitch.tv/PazSwagger. I stream every day I upload, so be sure to check me out to learn more about everything I talked about today. Thank you guys all so much for watching, but until next time, I've got to peace out and Paz out. I'll see you in the next one.